Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we take a stack of sources, articles, research, sometimes just the outright noise, and we subject it to a really rigorous forensic audit.
Yeah, our mission, as always, is to skip all that scrolling and get right to the core of what it means to be, well, truly informed.
And that mission has never felt more vital than when you're dealing with history.
Oh, absolutely. In the digital commons of the 21st century, history has just stopped being quiet.
It really has.
It's been packaged, it's been processed, and it's been turbocharged by algorithms that are, frankly, just obsessed with engagement. We're sort of witnessing what you might call an algorithmic crusade.
An algorithmic crusade. I like that. The past isn't just being studied anymore. It's being explicitly weaponized.
Exactly. And nothing drives clicks and shares quite like the promise of historical certainty.
Especially when that certainty claims to demolish some fundamental accepted narrative.
Right.
And the specific piece of ammunition we're auditing today comes from a pretty sensationalist YouTube video. The title is, and I'm quoting here, "This pharaoh left a stone that accidentally proved Islam wrong."
Wow. I mean, that title is a brilliant piece of what you called polemic advocacy journalism. It's promising a historical truth bomb.
It is.
Something capable of dismantling the entire theological architecture of a major world faith.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, it's pretty clear the video is deeply rooted in Christian apologetics. It presents history as a kind of zero-sum game.
Right. But beneath all of that, the rhetorical swagger and the dramatic music, there is an anchor, a stubborn, immovable, physical reality at the center of this whole storm. And that reality is a massive slab of black granite. It stands over 10 feet tall, that's 318 centimeters high, 163 wide, and it's currently cataloged as JE31408 in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
And this is the Merneptah Stele, a physical witness to events that happened more than 3,000 years ago.
So, our goal for this deep dive is pretty simple. We want to strip away every rhetorical flourish, ignore the modern theological posturing, and just subject the video's claims to verifiable, source-based scrutiny.
We need to meticulously separate the hard, undisputed facts of archaeology from the much more fluid, modern interpretations of theology and politics that have been layered on top of this ancient stone.
Exactly. We're conducting an audit on what the stone says versus what people claim it says.
It's the ultimate test of historical integrity against, well, digital engagement.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental witness. We should start with how it even came out of the sand and into our history books.
Let's do it.
So the story of the Stele's modern life, it doesn't begin in some pristine gallery. It starts in the desolate, dusty ruins of the West Bank of Thebes in Egypt, specifically in the winter of 1896. And this is where Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie, a name every archaeologist knows, makes the discovery.
And you really can't overstate Petrie's role. He's often called the father of scientific archaeology, and for good reason. His methodology just redefined the entire field.
How so? What was he doing differently?
Well, before Petrie, a lot of explorers were, to be blunt, treasure hunters. They were focused on high art, gold, flashy objects.
Stuff that looks good in a museum.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Petrie, on the other hand, was focused on stratigraphy, the careful layering of debris and dating artifacts through pottery sequences. He was meticulously cataloging the mundane, the stuff everyone else ignored.
So he wasn't looking for gold, he was looking for context.
Exactly. And that's why he chose to excavate Merneptah's mortuary temple. It was a site that had been largely ignored by others because it was just a mess. The complete jumble of shattered stone and rubble deemed, archaeologically uninteresting.
So he finds this enormous slab of granite that everyone else just walked past, buried in the ruins of a king's temple that nobody really cared about. Yeah. But the initial look at the stone, it reveals something just so human, so relatable about ancient power, and that is, it's recycled.
That's the forensic detail that makes this stele so fascinating. And really so ironic. We call it the usurpation.
The usurpation?
That massive slab of black granite wasn't originally quarried for Merneptah. It had been carved roughly 2 centuries earlier for Amenhotep III.
Wow. Amenhotep III from the 18th dynasty. He was one of the grandest builders Egypt ever had, famous for his colossal projects.
That's the one.
So, Merneptah, who was the son of Ramses the Great, arguably the most powerful pharaoh in history, he couldn't even spring for a new piece of granite. What does that tell us about his time, the 19th dynasty?
It tells you a lot, actually. It tells you about economics, about the changing political climate.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, his father, Ramses II, was a prolific builder, but even he operated on a scale that put immense pressure on the imperial coffers.
The well was running a little dry.
A little. And Merneptah, remember, he's the 13th son. He comes to the throne late in life. He inherits this powerful but very stressed empire. So it was simply more efficient, faster, and a whole lot cheaper to find an existing massive piece of stone.
One that was maybe lying around or not being used.
Exactly, and just appropriate it. It's an ancient recycling program driven by pure pragmatism.
So what did they do? Just flip it over?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Merneptah's masons simply turned the slab around. They probably smoothed down some of the original inscription on what was now the back of Amenhotep's history, and then they applied a layer of plaster or stucco to create a fresh, smooth surface.
And then carved Merneptah's massive victory hymn right on the reverse. So the original history, the older history, was literally turned to the wall and plastered over.
So a new history could be inscribed.
The metaphor there is just, it's profound, isn't it? Erasing one powerful history to write a new one. It completely mirrors the modern battles we're having over this very stone.
It really does. Everyone wants to turn the steel over, claim that blank slate, and inscribe their own narrative. Whether it's Christian apologetics or political denial or historical affirmation, the stone has always been a contested space for historical memory.
Always.
But the reason it became so universally significant in our time, that goes back to the moment of its decipherment. Petrie's team was working with a German philologist, Wilhelm Spiegelberg,
Okay.
and they were meticulously translating this boastful text from Pharaoh Merneptah, listing all the cities and the peoples he claimed to have conquered.
And then came the moment that changed biblical archaeology forever, the Israel revelation.
That's it. Spiegelberg's translation broke the silence. He was working his way down the column, listing the conquered territories in Canaan, and he identified one single crucial name near the bottom.
A name no one expected to see there.
And the identity of that name is what caused Petrie to make his famous and well-corroborated remark. He said, "This stele will be better known in the world than anything else I have found."
I can just imagine the electricity in that tent in 1896. Why was that one name so seismic? What was the intellectual climate at the time?
It was seismic because of this fierce academic debate that was raging, a critique known as the documentary hypothesis. And it often questioned the historical veracity of the early books of the Bible.
Right. The critics were basically arguing that the biblical stories about the Israelites being in Canaan during the late Bronze Age were just, a later literary invention.
Exactly, that they were written maybe during the time of the monarchy, centuries after the supposed events took place.
And their argument was essentially, look, if this group really existed and they were a force to be reckoned with, surely a major power like Egypt would have noticed them. They would have written them down somewhere.
And for decades, the silence from the archaeological records seemed to back them up. The Bible was the only source claiming that a people named Israel lived in Canaan during the Bronze Age. Skeptics pointed to that silence as proof of their non-existence at that time.
So the Merneptah Stele, which they dated precisely to around 1208 BC,
The 5th regnal year of Merneptah, yes.
it just shatters that entire argument. It provides the first external, non-biblical, hostile, and completely unambiguous confirmation that a socio-ethnic entity called Israel was not only there, in Canaan.
But it was significant enough to be targeted and, in Merneptah's telling, defeated by the reigning Egyptian superpower.
So when we look at the video's foundational claims, they're rock solid on this point.
Absolutely. The stele exists, its date and location are undisputed, and its significance to Near Eastern archaeology is paramount. So the historical positioning in the video, that part is definitely true.
Okay, so now we know what the stone is. Let's dig into the world that produced it. Because to understand why Israel appears as, well, almost a footnote, you first have to understand the geopolitical storm Merneptah was facing.
That context is everything. Merneptah is so often eclipsed by his father, Ramses II, Ramses the Great, who had this unbelievably long reign of 66 years.
66 years. And Merneptah comes to the throne under some pretty extraordinary circumstances. He wasn't just a son, he was the 13th son.
The 13th. That means he was well into his late middle age, likely in his 60s by the time he finally became pharaoh. He had to watch 12 older brothers die before him.
So he was more of a caretaker king, right? Not a conquering hero in the mold of his father.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. A caretaker king. He inherited an empire that, yes, it was vast and powerful on the surface, but internally it was brittle. This was not the opulent, stable 18th dynasty of Amenhotep III.
No.
Merneptah ruled on the immediate brink of the Late Bronze Age collapse.
And that collapse is one of the greatest systemic failures in human history. It wasn't just a war or a single event. It was an entire civilization network just unraveling. What were the specific pressures Merneptah was feeling?
Oh, they were systemic and multifaceted. It was a domino effect. You probably had significant environmental change, a persistent, severe drought across the eastern Mediterranean that would have wrecked agriculture.
Which leads to famine.
And famine fuels massive waves of migration. At the same time, the big centralized empires, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, they were collapsing.
And that would have just instantly severed the vital trade networks.
Especially the maritime tin and copper trade. The things you need to make bronze, the essential material of the age.
So if your trade routes break down, an empire that relies on international commerce and imported resources, it starts to fail immediately.
Exactly. So Merneptah's priority, it wasn't building new monuments or seeking, some grand, unnecessary glory in foreign lands. His priority was survival.
Survival and resource security.
That's it. And that brings us to the main subject of his massive stele, which is not, as that YouTube video might lead you to believe, Israel.
No, the stele is primarily a victory hymn, and it's celebrating the defeat of a massive Libyan coalition.
The vast majority of the text, we're talking dozens of lines, it details this crushing defeat of the Libu and the Meshwesh II major Libyan tribes. They had launched a huge, coordinated invasion of the Western Nile Delta in Merneptah's 5th year.
So this was an existential threat to Egypt itself. They were targeting the agricultural heartland.
It was a fight for survival. And these Libyans were allied with maybe the most famous and still the most mysterious antagonists of that entire era.
The Sea People.
The Sea Peoples. It was essentially a regional, if not a global, conflict by ancient standards. The inscriptions specifically names the invading forces as northerners coming from all lands.
And the scribes list them out, right?
Meticulously. They list the Ekwesh, the Teresh, the Luka, the Shurden, and the Shekelesh. These are the groups that we now collectively label the Sea Peoples.
And these names are still echoing in historical debates today. I mean, the mystery around who they actually were is still pretty dense.
It's incredibly dense.
Yeah.
Because they seem to appear out of nowhere. They bring advanced military tech, cause all this destruction, and then they either disappear or they settle and morph into new identities.
So who do scholars think they were?
Well, there are theories. The Luka are often associated with the inhabitants of Lycia, what's now Turkey. The Sheridan are often linked to Sardinia, though we know they were also working as mercenaries for Egypt before this.
And the Ekwesh.
The Ekwesh might be an early reference to the Achaeans, the Mycenaean Greeks, who would have been looking for new land after their own civilization collapsed back home.
So Merneptah was basically fighting this massive coalition of displaced, militarized people, refugees maybe, mercenaries, pirates.
All of the above. And they were threatening to dismantle the very foundations of the Egyptian state in the Delta. He was fighting for his life and for the continuity of Egypt as he knew it.
And he won.
He did. The victory was crucial. And frankly, it bought Egypt another few decades of existence while other empires were just crumbling around them. And you absolutely need that context to understand the mention of Canaan that comes later.
Right. Okay, so if the Libyan invasion is the main feature, the section that mentions Israel, the Canaan campaign, it has to be the secondary event. It appears in the final stanza of this massive poem.
It does.
So why would Merneptah, facing this existential threat in the West, divert resources for what seems like a small campaign in the Northeast?
That is a great question. And it speaks directly to strategic necessity. The placement of the Canaan campaign at the very end suggests it was a kind of mopping up operation.
A security measure, not a glory expedition.
Exactly. Think about it. While Merneptah's entire military apparatus is tied up in the West, fighting the Libyans and Sea Peoples, the vassal city-states in Canaan, which Egypt controlled and taxed, they see an opportunity.
Rebellion, when the master is distracted.
That's it. But Merneptah couldn't just let them rebel, because Canaan wasn't just about tribute money. It was about supply chain security.
Okay, so what was so vital about Canaan?
Two things, primarily. Securing the northern border, the buffer zone, and ensuring the continued flow of critical resources. We're talking grain, wine, wood into Egypt. And that all came down the strategic coastal road known as the Via Maris. Merneptah needed that stability to feed his people, especially with the climate disruptions.
So if the breadbasket is threatened, you have to deal with it immediately, even if the primary threat is somewhere else. The Canaan campaign was about restoring control, not expanding the empire.
Precisely. It was a rapid, punitive strike force. It was dispatched to suppress all the regional revolts, remind the vassals who was boss, and make sure those trade corridors were open for business.
And that strategic necessity explains why the names Ashkelon, Gezer, Yanoam, and Israel appear sequentially in the text.
Yes. Let's look at that key textual evidence again. Merneptah boasts. The Canaan has been plundered into every sort of woe. Ashkelon has been overcome. Gezer has been captured. Yanoam is made non-existent.
And then comes the line, Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. Karu, which is Syria, has become a widow for Egypt.
That sequence, it confirms the whole geopolitical picture. Ashkelon and Gezer were major known city-states, and Israel is listed right there among them, located squarely within the Egyptian sphere of influence during this critical time of regional instability.
So the video's depiction of the geopolitics of an Egyptian superpower securing its northern frontier against these rebellions, that all checked out.
It does. The historical context, the identity of the pharaoh, the reason for the campaign, all of that is verified as true.
Okay. We know when and where they were. Now we get to move into maybe the single most important and undisputed part of this whole audit, the linguistic analysis that reveals what Israel was.
Yes. This is where we move from the broad strokes of history to the micro details of hieroglyphic script. And it's where the evidence becomes, well, absolutely undeniable.
Because it rests on the technical structure of the Egyptian language itself.
Exactly. The video correctly claims that the specific hieroglyphs used to write the name Israel prove they were a people group and not a city. And this is a hugely significant validation of the biblical narrative.
So break this down for us. What is the key linguistic feature here?
It's all about something called the determinative. Hieroglyphic script is complex. It uses symbols for sounds, which we call phonograms, but it also uses symbols for meaning, which are ideograms. The determinative is the silent symbol that gets added at the end of a proper noun.
So it doesn't tell you how to pronounce the name, but it tells you what kind of thing that name refers to. It's a classifier.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's an unspoken classifier.
Yeah.
You know, if you write the word tree, the determinative is often a little drawing of a branch. If you write river, it's often 3 squiggly lines for water. The whole system was designed to prevent ambiguity.
And the Egyptian scribes were, as you said, meticulous in how they used these.
Incredibly so. And that meticulousness creates this crucial anomaly when you compare Israel to the other places Merneptah says he conquered in Canaan.
Okay, let's look at that list again.
So you have Ashkelon, Gezer, and Yanoam. In the Egyptian orthography, these are all written with the 3 hills determinative. It's known as the Hasset sign.
And that sign always means one thing.
Universally. It indicated a foreign country, or more specifically, a walled, static, foreign city-state. So the boast is that Merneptah overcame these cities.
But when the scribe gets to Israel, the category changes completely.
The change is explicit. It's deliberate. Israel is written with 2 determinatives. First, you get the throw stick, which just means something foreign or hostile.
Okay.
But second, and this is the critical part, the scribe uses the symbol of a seated man and a seated woman placed over 3 plural strokes. And that is the universal classifier for a plural group of people.
This is the slam dunk, isn't it? This is the one undisputed fact that just refutes any argument that the scribes are just being careless.
This is the academic slam dunk. It's acknowledged by every single Egyptologist, regardless of their views on biblical history.
So what's the definitive implication?
The implication is that in 1208 BC, Merneptah's scribes, the Egyptian intelligence of the day, they categorized Israel not as a geographical place, not as a walled city that could be captured like Gezer,
But as a people.
as a non-urban socio-ethnic entity, a tribal confederation. They were recognized as a mobile or at least a decentralized people group, not a static political structure with a king and walls.
And that aligns perfectly with the archaeological picture of the time.
Perfectly. It aligns with the settlement patterns we see in the early Iron Age in the Central Highlands, the hill country of Judea and Samaria. Excavations show this rapid increase in small, unwalled settlements during this exact period.
Which is the pattern you'd expect from a tribal confederation like the one described in the biblical books of Joshua and Judges before they had a monarchy.
Exactly. So the stele, commissioned by a hostile pharaoh who wanted to destroy them, accidentally validates the Bible's internal description of Israel as a decentralized people group at that time.
That is just extraordinary. So the linguistic analysis confirming Israel's classification as a people group, that is irrefutably true. Now let's turn to the most dramatic part of the text, the part that's so often misinterpreted. Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. The video presents this as a claim of total annihilation, but there's a critical scholarly nuance here, isn't there? It all centers on that word seed.
Yes. The Egyptian phrase is ISURFK.T BNRPRTF. And the whole debate hinges on how you translate that one word, Petrie.
And it can mean a couple of different things.
Right. Pert can mean coming forth. It can mean offspring, your seed, your progeny, or it can mean grain, the seed you plant, your agricultural produce.
So if you take the minority view, you translate part as offspring.
You do. And that suggests Merneptah was boasting of genocide. That he didn't just defeat them, he destroyed the people and their ability to reproduce, to continue their lineage.
That's a very dramatic reading.
It is, but it often falls apart when you scrutinize it against the reality of Merneptah's capabilities and the typical, hyperbole of Pharaonic boasts. They rarely missed a chance to exaggerate a victory.
So what's the majority view?
The majority scholarly view, the one championed by top Egyptologists and archaeologists like Michael Hasel, is that Prut in this context refers to grain, food supplies.
And why is the grain interpretation considered stronger?
Two main reasons. First, the determinative used with the word prut in this specific inscription often supports the meaning of plant life or agricultural yield. And second, think about the context. If Israel was, as we've established, a people group living in unwalled settlements in the Central Highlands, then the most effective military tactic to lay them waste would be economic warfare. You destroy their crops, you burn their food stores. That enforces subjugation and prevents future rebellion far more effectively than trying to hunt down every last person in the hills.
And that reading has another implication, doesn't it? It would mean the Israelites were already settled and farming?
Exactly.
They weren't just nomadic wanderers passing through.
Precisely. The grain reading provides vital archaeological confirmation of their settlement patterns. It suggests they were settled agriculturalists, and their primary infrastructure was what Merneptah destroyed. This is a standard, devastating tactic in ancient warfare.
It causes immediate famine, it forces surrender, but it doesn't necessarily require the total physical annihilation of every single person.
No, it's a boast of economic subjugation, though the phrasing is absolutely designed to sound as terrifying as possible. It's a psychological weapon.
So regardless of which interpretation you take, the critical factor here is the profound irony of the boast itself.
Right. Merneptah's attempt to write Israel's obituary in stone became the ultimate proof of their life and their survival. He meant to consign them to historical oblivion.
And yet, 3,000 years later, we are using his stone, his boast, as the earliest external evidence that they were in fact there.
Yeah.
The boast was a demonstrable, spectacular failure.
The linguistic and archaeological facts confirm it. Merneptah targeted a non-urban people group in Canaan and claimed their destruction. All of that information is meticulously verified.
Okay, so we've established the solid historical facts, the stone, the context, the language. Now we arrive at the most contentious part of the video's claim, the conclusion that this stone accidentally proved Islam wrong.
And to verify this, we have to perform the ultimate act of source auditing. We have to separate modern political rhetoric from ancient theological texts.
This is the essential firewall we have to build. The video's core logical flaw is that it conflates Islam, meaning the faith and the holy texts, the Quran,
with modern political or revisionist narratives, which are espoused by certain contemporary political and religious leaders. They are not the same thing.
Not at all. So we have to subject this to two very distinct tests.
Yes.
Let's start with test one. Does the Merneptah Stele actually contradict the Quran? The video implies that Islamic scripture denies the ancient existence of Israel in the Holy Land.
And based on a straightforward textual analysis of the Quran, the answer to that is irrefutably false.
Explain that.
Well, the term children of Israel, or Bani Israel, is ubiquitous in the Quran. The scripture is filled with explicit references to the history of the Israelites, their prophets like Moses, their covenants with God, and their presence in the Levant.
So the Quran, far from denying their ancient presence, actually narrates it as a foundational historical truth.
It actively narrates it. Can we cite some specific examples?
Please.
Absolutely. The Quran affirms the Israelites' historical claim to the land as given by God. If you look at Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 21, the prophet Moses commands his people to enter the Holy Land. It says, "O my people, enter the Holy Land which Allah has assigned to you."
That's a direct scriptural corroboration of their ancient presence and the command to enter the land.
It is. And the narrative continues after the Exodus. It confirms their dwelling in the land. In Surah Al-Isra, verse 104, God speaks directly to the children of Israel and says, "And thereafter we said to the children of Israel, dwell in the land."
So it confirms the scriptural understanding that they were established there as a people.
Yes, and one more. Surah Al-Araf, verse 137, describes the Israelites inheriting the blessed land after being oppressed. It says, "And we caused the people who had been oppressed to inherit the eastern regions of the land and the western ones, which we had blessed."
So the internal logic of the Islamic holy texts actually requires the historical presence of the Israelites in that land.
It does. So on a foundational scriptural level, the Merneptah Stele, which confirms Israel's presence in 1208 BC, is actually in agreement with the Quranic narrative. They both attest to the historical fact of Bani Israel dwelling in that region.
The video's indictment of the scripture is therefore factually incorrect.
It is. Now, let's flip this. Let's go to test 2. Does the stele contradict certain modern Islamic or political narratives?
And here, the answer is a resounding true.
Yes. This is where the video's claim finds its true target and, to be honest, its rhetorical power.
We're now focusing on the highly politicized campaign that's known as temple denial, or sometimes the Canaanite narrative.
And this is a modern political strategy. It's designed to achieve specific geopolitical goals by fundamentally rewriting history.
What is the core thesis of this Canaanite narrative?
The argument is essentially that Jewish people have no ancient history in the land, that the biblical narratives were fabricated much later, and that modern Palestinians are the sole, continuous indigenous descendants of the ancient Canaanites.
Which means that narrative requires the complete historical erasure of the Israelite period.
It has to be erased for the narrative to work. And what's fascinating and frankly a bit disturbing is when you look at the data points that show how quickly this historical revisionism happened, you can trace this dramatic shift in institutional positions over less than 100 years.
Okay, give us the comparison.
Let's start in 1925. At that time, the Supreme Muslim Council of Jerusalem, the main institutional body overseeing the holy sites, they published an official guide to the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount.
An official guidebook?
An official guidebook. And the key statement in that guide concerning the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa was unequivocal. It acknowledged that the site's identity with the site of Solomon's temple is, quote, beyond dispute.
Wow. So in 1925, the chief Islamic authority in Jerusalem was openly confirming the ancient Jewish history of that specific location.
Official institutional acknowledgement.
Yeah.
But that acknowledgement completely dissolves in the political climate of the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
When does that shift really become public?
It becomes public and very stark in the 2000s. I mean, at the Camp David summit in 2000, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat suddenly told President Bill Clinton that Solomon's temple wasn't even in Jerusalem.
He said it was where?
He claimed it was in Nablus or maybe even Yemen. This is a direct, high-level political act of denying the Jewish connection to their holiest site.
And this denial then starts to trickle down to other religious figures.
It does. The current Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Ekrem Sabri, has repeatedly claimed that there's not a single stone that exists to prove Jewish history in Jerusalem or the surrounding land. And you even see it in international bodies like UNESCO.
What happened there?
Well, influenced by state-sponsored political agendas, they passed multiple resolutions, like a really controversial one in 2016, that either ignore or minimize the Jewish connection to the Temple Mount, referring to the site exclusively by its Muslim names.
This is the very definition of history being weaponized. The claim isn't just academic, it's political. It's an assertion that because there's no ancient Jewish history in the land, modern Israelis have no historical claim, which makes them colonial invaders.
And this is precisely where the Merneptah Stele stands like a massive black granite shield against that revisionist narrative.
Right. The denialists claim Jewish people are modern foreign colonizers.
And the stele, commissioned by an external, hostile Egyptian pharaoh, confirms that a people group called Israel was a recognized entity in that very region 3,200 years ago, contemporaneous with the pharaohs in the biblical period of the Judges.
It's the external proof of existence and indigeneity, the very thing the denialists claim is absent.
The Merneptah Stele is the one physical artifact that stands immovable against this specific modern political strategy. It provides the external confirmation that ancient Israel was real, was settled, and was politically significant enough to warrant an Egyptian military campaign.
So let's just reiterate the final verdict on the video's core claim. It's mixed.
It has to be. The video successfully identifies a powerful historical witness that demolishes a specific, modern, politically motivated revisionist narrative, the temple denial thesis.
But it fails completely and factually by trying to indict the entire scripture of Islam, which, as we've shown, actually corroborates the basic historical fact of Israel's presence.
And that distinction matters profoundly. because it teaches you how to evaluate the source, in this case the video, and separate the legitimate historical evidence it presents from the polemical agenda it's trying to serve.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've established that the Merneptah Stele is the earliest undisputed external proof of Israel's existence. But that word, undisputed, it kind of opens the door to a critical question that a true deep dive has to address.
Which is?
Is Merneptah truly the absolute first extra-biblical mention? We need to look at the strategic gap in the video's presentation.
Ah, yes. This takes us into the fascinating world of forensic epigraphy and contested evidence, specifically to an artifact known as the Berlin pedestal.
Cataloged as Relief 21687.
That's the one. And this piece suggests that the earliest documentation of Israel might go back even further, potentially pushing the timeline back by 2 whole centuries.
So tell us about this pedestal. What is it and what makes it so difficult to work with?
So the Berlin pedestal is this granite fragment that was acquired by the Egyptian Museum in Berlin way back in 1913. It's believed to be part of a victory monument, the base of a statue, most likely, probably from the huge temple complex at Karnak.
And like the Merneptah Stele, it lists conquered enemies.
Yes. It contains 3 name rings, which is very characteristic of these monuments. Each one depicts a bound prisoner, signifying a conquered foe.
So what are the names?
The first 2 rings are pretty well preserved. They're clearly identified as Ashkelon and Canaan. But the 3rd ring, the one that might hold the key, is badly damaged.
So it's like a historical cold case where you only have partial DNA.
That is a perfect analogy. For decades, it was just impossible to be certain of that 3rd name. But then, starting around 2010, a team of scholars, Manfred Gerg, Peter van der Veen, Christopher Thijs, they undertook this rigorous re-examination.
Using modern techniques.
Exactly. Modern forensic techniques, high-res photographs, and meticulous comparison with every other known hieroglyphic form from that period.
And what did they conclude about that damaged 3rd name ring?
They argue that based on the surviving traces, and we're talking about faint remnants of signs, but signs consistent with the orthography of Israel, they argue the name was, in fact, Israel.
Spelled out how?
As Iisriir. They maintain that the surviving elements really only allow for this reading when you compare it to other known name rings of that period.
Okay, so if we accept their reading just for a moment, what is the crucial timeline shift that this artifact implies?
This is the revolutionary part. The dating of this relief is based not on context, because it was acquired, not excavated in situ, but on orthography and artistic style.
The way the letters are carved and the art style.
Yes. And based on that, the consensus of the scholars involved dates this relief firmly to the 18th dynasty, specifically during the reign of Amenhotep II, or Thutmose IV, which places it somewhere around 1400 BC.
1400 BC, that's 200 years earlier than Merneptah. That is an enormous jump. How does that fundamentally alter the historical landscape of Israel's settlement?
Oh, it dramatically shifts the focus of the whole Exodus and conquest debate. Remember, the undisputed Merneptah Stele from 1208 BC that perfectly supports what's known as the late Exodus model.
Which suggests the Israelites were only just beginning to establish themselves in the Central Highlands right before 1208.
Right. But the Berlin pedestal pushes the date of a recognized defeated Israel way back.
So it forces us to consider the early Exodus model.
It does. If Israel was a named, established, and powerful enough entity to be listed as a conquered foe by an 18th dynasty pharaoh around 1400 BC, that chronology aligns far more closely with a specific biblical chronology, like the calculation of 1 Kings 6.1.
Which places the Exodus in the mid-15th century BC.
Exactly. It would suggest Israel's presence in Canaan was well established much earlier than the mainstream academic consensus currently accepts.
So it introduces this whole new layer of complexity.
Yeah.
It's basically saying the Merneptah Stele is merely proof of Israel's survival into the 19th dynasty, not proof of their initial settlement.
That's the key inference. It suggests their roots in Canaan could be far deeper than the most famous single artifact currently proves. If this reading is correct, the Berlin pedestal would be confirmation that Israel was a major political player in the late Bronze Age before the collapse really hit.
So, if this is so potentially revolutionary, why does the Berlin pedestal remain academically contested? Why isn't it a slam dunk like the Merneptah Stele?
Well, the caution really boils down to 3 main factors, and they all relate to its fragmented state. First, and most obviously, that crucial 3rd name ring is just so heavily damaged. It leads to necessary speculation in the reconstruction of the hieroglyphs.
So even if the Gerg team's reading is persuasive, Not every scholar is convinced.
Exactly. They might argue that the faint traces aren't definitively Israel. It's a matter of interpreting very faint lines in stone.
Okay, what's the second reason for caution?
The issue of block reuse. As we saw with the Merneptah Stele itself, Egyptian pharaohs frequently usurped and recycled older materials. They'd add their own inscriptions or just use an old block in a new building.
So critics could argue that even if the style looks 18th dynasty, the block itself could have been moved and reused later.
Right, which makes dating based solely on style a little less secure than an artifact that was discovered in its original place, in situ.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And the third point of contention.
The orthography itself. The way Israel is spelled on the pedestal, that Isriirrr, is slightly different from the spelling on the Merneptah Stele. Now, these variations are common in Egyptian, but some skeptical scholars suggest the traces could plausibly be reconstructed as a different name entirely.
A region or a different people group that just happens to have similar components.
And the lack of that specific people group, determinative, also means the identity of the group is less clear than it is in Merneptah's very explicit inscription.
So it sounds like the YouTube video made a strategic omission here. They focused on the Merneptah Stele because it offers this 100% verified, undisputed, slam dunk piece of evidence.
Right.
You can deploy that instantly in a polemical argument. They didn't want the messiness of academic uncertainty.
Exactly. Advocacy journalism prefers certainty. A deep dive, however, requires that we acknowledge that the most exciting historical possibilities often lie in the contested evidence.
And the Berlin pedestal is a powerful suggestion that the earliest roots of the people Merneptah boasted of destroying may be 200 years older.
And that the Egyptian record might, eventually, provide definitive proof of Israel's presence even before the late Bronze Age collapse.
It's a humbling reminder that the established historical timeline is always subject to change, based on the next fragment of granite that gets unearthed.
It certainly is.
Okay, so this forensic audit, all focused on one 10-foot slab of black granite, has led us through 3 millennia of history, linguistics, and geopolitics. The noise surrounding this artifact is deafening.
But the evidence it presents is actually sharp and undeniable once you clear away the clutter.
Let's consolidate the key, undisputed facts that we've verified in this deep dive. First, the Merneptah Stele is, without question, the earliest undisputed external proof of Israel's existence in Canaan. It confirms they were established in that region by 1208 BC.
Second, the linguistic determinative is absolutely crucial. It identifies Israel not as a city-state like its neighbors, but specifically as a distinct people group or tribal confederation, and that aligns perfectly with the early Iron Age archaeological picture.
Third, and this is most relevant to the digital battlefield we talked about at the start, the stele stands as an immovable object against modern political revisionist narratives, specifically that temple denial thesis, which seeks to erase Israel's deep ancient history in the land.
And finally, you have come back to the profound, enduring irony of the stele itself. Merneptah commissioned a document of erasure. He instructed a scribe to carve a lie intended to consign a people to oblivion. Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more.
He intended to write their death certificate.
He did. Yet 3,200 years later, that very stone is used to prove the exact opposite of its intent. Merneptah is dust. His magnificent victory hymn is being translated by the descendants of the people he claimed to have extinguished,
Confirming their life and their survival.
The stone itself doesn't lie, even if the king who paid for it did.
The YouTube video we analyzed, despite its overly aggressive polemical packaging, it correctly identified the Merneptah Stele as a pivotal historical witness.
He did.
In a region where history is constantly being rewritten to serve the politics of the present, that stone is a heavy, stubborn, silent truth that confirms an ancient presence.
And that persistence of historical reality, that's what makes this kind of deep dive into the sources so essential.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you, the listener. We spent a good amount of time discussing the Berlin pedestal, the contested evidence that could potentially push Israel's established timeline back 200 years. So, if a single fragmented piece of granite still being debated by scholars holds the potential to dramatically reshape major geopolitical and historical chronologies, what other historical footnotes might exist today? Perhaps sitting in museum storerooms or still buried beneath the soil.
Footnotes that, if they were fully uncovered and accepted by consensus, could reshape current geopolitical narratives and push other established timelines even further back.
The search for the past is truly never finished.
Never.
We'll leave you to mull that over. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.